Hello and welcome, dear viewers, to a new episode of today's Youth. And our main topic today is the African development and climate change. And we will be talking about the current annual meeting of the African Development Bank that's taking place currently in the city of Sharm el-Sheikh. And we'll be joined over the phone by Ambassador Abdallah Kagame. He's the Ambassador of African Youth, right after the short break. And we're delighted to be joined over the phone by Ambassador Abdallah Kagame. He's the Ambassador of African Youth. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
The current annual meeting of the African Development Bank is taking place currently in Sharm el-Sheikh. How do you see the significance of this event and this meeting for African youth and development?
Firstly, we know that this conference is held in Sharm el-Sheikh or under the supervision of Egyptian government and under the Central Bank of Egypt and the African Development Bank. If we know, we recall back that African Development Bank is established in 1964. And the main purpose and the aim of this bank is to help to reduce poverty, improve living conditions for Africans, and mobilize resources for the continent's economic and social development. And we know that Egypt, too, in the other hand, and the Egyptian government used since years back to enhance the African interaction and African relation with Egypt. And this conference significant for help to gather the meaning, or I would say the ideas of African development banks and Egyptian and all African governments in order to enhance this social and especially the climate change that was COP27 that was held in Sharm el-Sheikh through some months back. So this is what we call it. This conference is used to improve the climate change and the green, what we call it, Africa, that we are talking about.
Right. Well, do you think that this conference or this meeting is an opportunity to contribute to the prosperity of the continent, including the climate agenda, climate finance, and mobilizing more resources in Africa?
Yeah. Of course, this conference that was held since 2 days back is talking about all these African enhancement, and we know that the climate change, we have many problems, or I would say the many challenges in Africa, especially regarding the climate change. And this conference it was held in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt for the government and the private sector together with the African Bank in order to see how to deliver all that green Africa, or what we want to do to reach that sustainable development and the goals and or what we call it of the sustainable development and the impact of women, impact of what we call it youth in enhancing all these issues in Africa and the government and private sector, which is going on now in Sharm el-Sheikh.
Right. Well, the theme of the event is mobilizing private sector financing for climate and green growth in Africa. How far will the meetings have provided for bank governors to share their experiences? How far is sharing those experiences in such an event help in providing financial resources for climate change and for climate action in the African continent?
I think if we, the way we see the conference is moving on, and the speeches of the personnel in the what we call it conference on climate changes and what they did, we have many things that was done in the ground that was said in the conference that enhances all these issues. For example, if we see the African Development Group president, Akinwumi Adesina, has called a young university graduate to be instrument of change in the world. Which is very important that, like we know in Africa, all these new graduate or university graduate or youth in Africa are not that performing that good. And for government personnel and private sectors and African Development Bank presidents to come in a speech in this conference to enhance or to improve that the young leaders, or I will say the young youth or graduates, they need them to enhance all this, what they call it, what they need to achieve in Africa or in climate. I think this makes us to be proud as youth that the government personnel or the African Development Bank or all these private sectors are now knowing or are now trying to enhance this young, what we call it, intelligent youth to improve or to make Africa to be in the development sector or in climate change. And we know that climate change is a very big issue in Africa that we need to tackle, all of us, not only the private sector, not only the government, but the new graduates, the youth, the women, all these separate, or I will say the different aspects of people living in Africa needs to gather and think and enhance all these climate changes for us to reach the development and for us to have a good, conducive, or I will say the green, I will say good place in Africa to live and to reduce all these climate changes problems or challenges here in Africa.
Right. Well, you mentioned, of course, the importance of private sector financing. Do you think that climate change and private sector financing will help in bridging the gap between finance flows and Africa's climate green growth needs?
Yeah, of course. If we see that the African Development Banks used to enhance all these issues, for example, just a month back in Nigeria, they established about $15 million US, the loan to infrastructure credit to Guarantee Company Limited and stretching its capital based on to help the close Nigeria's infrastructure finance gap. And they used to for months back to development and in supporting Egypt's efforts to tap the panda bonds of markets and to advance the renewable energy and sustainable water management sector, among others. If we see all these private sectors, all these banks, all these governments, the Egyptian government, Nigerian government, all these huge countries in Africa that work hand in hand with this African Development Bank and supporting each other and supporting the private sector, I think all these issues used to give impact and positive way and show us that Africa is moving towards the good, what we call it, climate changes and green, what we call it, conducive place for African citizens and African people, or even the world in Africa to be in this good manner or good way of living.
Mm-hmm. Right. Do you think this annual meeting represents a decisive step in attracting more private sector investment into Africa's clean energy sector?
I mean, in this conference, they used to impact of the private sector, because we know that private sector is a sector that is moving, I would say, smoothly. Or all these developments that we are seeing in the world, the private sector used to enhance all these issues. For example, we in Africa, only governments can not do this work. We must need this private sector, because with the gathering of what we call it, with the help of private sector, things will be moving smoothly, because we know the government has many things to do. The government has many what we call it deals on to resolve and to do, but the private sector is just the straight something that used to enhance all these issues, and the private sector are doing well in Africa. And in this conference, we see all the discussions, all the speeches, all this that impact or has the impact of private sector in development and to climate change, to see that Africa is moving towards prosperity and development, especially in climate change and this green world that we need Africa to be in.
Right. How far do you think the African Development Bank will be able to explore innovative approaches to boost private sector finance in Africa?
I know that
out-of-the-box ideas.
I mean, the African Development Bank is doing its what they call it the best now and we know that we have lack of adequate financing for tackling climate changes in Africa. This has become a problem to us in Africa, lack of adequate financing, and the African Development Bank, I think, with the financing and with gathering, for example, like this annual meeting, like these conferences, I know that all these ideas that and the speech and the government personnel with the central banks of African countries, with help and the guide of all these ideas, different ideas of African great people in Africa and the governments in Africa that are doing, I think with this, we are going to, what we call it, overcome the adequate finance, what we call lack of adequate financing. And if we see that the African Development Bank president also said on Monday in the conference that when he was addressing some of the journalists of Africa and around the world at the media launch organized to kick off the bank groups in 2023 annual meeting in the Egyptian resort in Sharm el-Sheikh, he said that developed nations for not, he called out developed nations for not honoring the, what we call it, 100 Egyptian billion Egyptian, US dollars yearly in the climate finance pledge to make the development countries and to enhance these countries or African. All this, what we see, he's talking about the African Development Bank and the lack of financing, and he's calling to the in the world and the developed countries to enhance and to give and to help and guide all this for us to reach the sustainable development and the climate changes issue.
Right. Well, I would like to thank you very much, Mr. Abdallah Kagame, Ambassador of African Youth. Many thanks for your insight. And that wraps up this edition of today's Youth. Many thanks for watching, and don't forget to join us next week, same time. Till then, goodbye.